Hello, and welcome to our series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. I'm Russell Robinson, Chief Executive Officer of Jewish National Fund USA. We build in the land of Israel through your philanthropic investments. Our water solutions, groundbreaking research and development, and reclaiming the desert are shared the world over. In the United States, we are the leader in Zionist engagement, reaching over 20,000 students a year. Today, Israel serves as a light unto nations. Today, Israel makes the world a better place. As I travel the world and meet so many people of all ages, I share their frustration. The definition of Zionism, our people's movement for self-determination, has been hijacked by those who are anti the Jewish people and who have no understanding of history or facts. Well, no more. The time has come to be the voice of what Zionism really is. Zionism comes in all colors, shapes, and sizes. It's inclusive, diverse, respectful. Zionism builds bridges. It's about freedom, freedom of religion, freedom of expression. It's a beautiful movement that has changed the course of the Jewish people. Zionism gives all of us strength. Zionism supports Israel, a country where synagogues, mosques, churches all share the same skyline. A country where Christians, Jews, and Muslims live as neighbors and sit around the table. And while they have different views, they all have a seat within the tent of Abraham. Jewish National Fund USA is hosting a series of real stories, human interactions, short films, interview, panel discussions, and more. We're exposing the beautiful and diverse facets and facts of Zionism. Join me on this journey, together with Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. This is Zionism.
Imagine a conversation about Israel, global Jewry, the leaders of today, of tomorrow, with people from Dimona, Denver, Kiryat Shimona, and Oklahoma. For the first time in Jewish history, Jewish National Fund is creating a conversation that will build bridges across generations, denominations, politics, and oceans. Direct from Beersheba, in the footsteps of Abraham. A state-of-the-art village that will inspire Jewish leaders of all ages and backgrounds from all across the globe. A campus surrounded by sports fields, a 1,300-acre park, a 28-acre lake, an amphitheater, a 26-screen cinematheque, and Israel's largest mall. The campus will include an internship, innovation, and technology center, the first Zionist adult education center in the world, the southern campus of our semester abroad high school in Israel, top quality conference center facilities, study areas, a food court, restaurants, a synagogue, beautifully landscaped outdoor space, classrooms, and comfortable, modern overnight accommodations for short and long-term stays. Join us as we embark on a journey to build the first campus of its kind, a campus that says, we believe in the future of global Jewry. In 1901, there was Theodore Herzl. In 1948, there was David Ben-Gurion. Today, there is you.
With us this evening, Arsen Ostrovsky, fleeing from Odessa with his family to Australia, growing up as a secular Jew, moving to Israel, becoming one of the #1 human rights lawyers in the world, and advocate for Zionism. Welcome. Arsen, welcome to our show. I will tell you that there is no one that I'm more excited about having on our show on Zionism who really talks about it from, and not only talks about it, you are the leader in bringing people the message of Israel, Zionism. You're one of, online, the social media mavens about really getting our messages out. But people have to get to know you. And I know that you were born in Odessa, your family fled to Australia, and now you live in Israel. And you have to enlighten us, why from Odessa to Australia? And then we're going to get to why to Israel.
Thank you, Russell, for the kind introduction. This is one of my favorite topics, Zionism, with one of my favorite people, you, Russell, and truly the work that you and JNF USA do today really, I think, embodies the very essence of what is modern day Zionism. So thank you again for having me on and being part of this conversation and part of this discussion. Now, I moved from Australia, which is about as far away as possible, to Israel. I had a wonderful upbringing in Australia, but I was born in Odessa, in the Soviet Union. My family, entire family, for generations back, was from the Ukraine, from the Soviet Union. And we lived through pogroms, we lived through communism, lived through the Holocaust. But we always knew our place in society. As Jews, we were second-class citizens. My passport, under the heading nationality, said Jew. We were the only ones under which that label was made. So there was always a yearning to escape, for freedom, to be treated as equal citizens amongst the world. So ultimately,
I'm going to stop you for a second. I think it's important for people to hear that a little bit more, because I don't believe people understand. Your family is in Odessa. They're from their generations, not a religious family. Obviously felt the peoplehood of Judaism, but the Soviet Union said you were a Jew. So much so that your passport said you were a Jew. And I just want to clarify that for everybody to understand that during that time, that was the reality. Whether you wanted to be a Jew and you felt you were religious and you were waving the flag of Israel, the Soviet Union said you were.
They said that we were Jew, irrespective of whether we were religious or not, irrespective of whether you were Orthodox, Reform. They didn't care about those labels. A Jew was a Jew was a Jew for them, and there was enough. And there was enough to label us as second-class citizens, to deny us our basic freedoms, our rights. My family, my grandfathers had both been imprisoned on trumped-up charges. So we know very well, what it meant to be a dissident, what it meant to yearn for freedom. And even though my family wasn't religious, because they didn't know how to be religious, they weren't allowed to learn at synagogues, to learn Hebrew. They didn't know any Jewish customs. Before my bar mitzvah, I didn't know any Jewish customs either. But there was an understanding of our Jewishness as our identity, as our nationality, as who we were. And by being labeled as such in the Soviet Union, we were automatically labeled as second-class citizens.
Very important. As we start talking about today's modern Zionist battlefield, it's not, the labels are there, and whether we want them or not, they're there. So it's about standing up. And your family then goes to Australia.
That's right. So we were the last of our family to flee. We left in '87. I was a small child then. And at that time, it was still the Soviet Union. And apart from Israel, it was only Australia, United States, and Canada that were accepting Russian Jews, Soviet Jews as refugees. So my entire family is right now split between the United States, between Canada and Australia. It just so happened that at that moment in time, Australia was the easier option. And it also happened to be about the furthest possible option from the Soviet Union as well. So I grew up in Australia. It was a wonderful upbringing. I had everything I could possibly ask for. It was a wonderful life. But a short time after I moved to Israel, I was in a taxi, and the taxi driver asked me, noticing the accent, "Where are you from?" I said, "Australia." And he says, "Mata mishugana, are you crazy?" Why? What do you mean? And he says, we have all these problems here in Israel. We have the constant war with the Palestinians. The secular hate the Haredim, and Haredim don't like the secular. I pay too much for gas and electricity, and my grown-up children still live with me, and you moved from Australia. What problems do you have in Australia? He asked me. My problems in Australia were, which bar do we go to with friends after work for a drink? Or which football do we watch? Those were my problems. My problems weren't matters of life and existence. It wasn't of, I have 20 seconds to get my daughters and take them to bomb shelter. I didn't have those issues, but there was always that sense of yearning that ultimately my heart, it belonged in Israel because that was my country and those were my people.
When was your first trip to Israel?
My first trip to Israel was actually on birthright. It was in 2000 and end of 2002. There was a moment where I wanted to go to Israel, but I was waiting for the right moment, and I thought to myself, I'm going to go when there's going to be peace. That's when I'll go. I figured, okay, I'm not going to wait anymore. So I ended up going in the middle of the second Intifada. I said, I'm not going to wait anymore. For me, I fell in love automatically. It was love at first sight. And it's one of those things for me, I can read about Jerusalem, for example. I can watch it. I can hear stories. But until you go there, until you stand at the Western Wall and touch that stone with your hand, until you see the Mediterranean and step foot in there, until you see it, until you can feel it, it's another experience altogether. So for me, when I moved to Israel, it was a sense of coming home. It was a sense of belonging. It wasn't that I ever felt that I didn't belong in Australia, but it was a sense of truly being part of something bigger here, part of a broader mission, a purpose, meaning, a part of the very story that's still unfolding, the very story of Zionism, modern Zionism, to be a part of that, not just to be a bystander, not just to watch history unfold, but to be here and actually influence history, to vote, to shape my own destiny, our people's destiny.
See, I'm going to unpack that a little bit for our audience because I think it's such a powerful moment. Your family comes from Ukraine, where you're generations and generations, you're Ukrainian. And the Soviet Union, not only do they tell you you're Jewish, whether you want to be or not, but by being Jewish, you're second class. You go to Australia, you have a great life. And you can take from freedom that you were able to finally gather from Ukraine to go to Australia, you've done enough, that you don't have to get into this battle. You've done the battle. You're there, but that isn't you. And you not only with a yearning, but you decided to not only go to a visit, but move there and then to become an activist. How does that, in your mind, happen, Arsen?
We knew we were Jewish. We knew we loved Israel, even though Israel for me was an abstract concept then. I didn't know what it meant. I hadn't been there. So I grew up in a very assimilated life because my parents took the view that they left Soviet Union, they escaped anti-Semitism. They knew what racial hatred was. They knew what being treated like the other was. So they wanted me to blend in. They wanted me to be like everyone else. But it was purely out of a sense of protection, out of a good place in their heart. And that is how I grew up. I grew up a very assimilated life. I think like a lot of Soviet Jews from my experience. But for me, the changing point was actually Danny Pearl. If you remember Danny Pearl, the American Jewish journalist for the Wall Street Journal. I was at university finishing my studies at the time. I was studying law and business. And you remember the story, I think everyone remembers the harrowing story of Danny Pearl, who was executed by terrorists in Pakistan. And his final chilling last words were, "My father is Jewish, my mother is Jewish, I am Jewish." Those were his final words. I saw that. I was moved to tears. It jarred me. And it got me thinking, what does being a Jew mean to me? What does being a Zionist mean to me? How does Israel fit into this picture? So many ways that harrowing experience awoke me. It moved me. It moved me to learn about Israel. It moved me to study about Judaism, about Zionism. What is Zionism? I didn't know what Zionism meant. What is it? How does it fit into my own life? Ultimately, it was this process of education and learning that led me to my first trip to Israel, which was in 2002. It was a few more years later, not until 2012, that I finally made Aliyah. But it was ultimately, I always felt that from that moment, from 2002, it was ultimately leading to this path. But it took a little while to ultimately get there.
Are you looking for that perfect gift? The one thing you know that they won't have? Now you can honor someone you love and participate in the sacred act of writing a Torah. You can go online and choose a letter, word, verse, or more in a Torah being written right here in Israel on top of Masada. A beautiful certificate will be sent, signifying the link to our ancient past, and be something that they can keep forever. It's the ideal gift for birth, bar and bat mitzvahs, birthdays, engagements, weddings, anniversaries, and other milestones in life.
What's your definition of Zionism from a person who has this background?
Look, I can tell you the definition. What the definition is for me will ultimately be different, I think, to everyone, because Zionism is such an inherently personal concept. I think on a broad level, Zionism means the right of the Jewish people to self-determination and liberation in our ancestral homeland, in the land of Israel. That is what Zionism means in the broadest sense of the term. But for me, I define Zionism in two words, what it means for me. One, hope. And two, empowerment. Hope for me, because for millennia, and this is not just me now, for millennia, for Jewish people who've gone through inquisitions, pogroms, Holocaust, communism, racial prejudice, there was that hope, that yearning for Zion, for return to our homeland, to be free in our land, in the land of Israel. It was that hope that sustained us through all that hardship, through all those years, through all those catastrophes that befell upon the Jewish people. It was that hope for Zion that was that flickering flame in our hearts that allowed us to not only survive, to thrive, and finally realize this dream in 1948 when we established the Jewish state. So that's hope. But today, for me, Zionism also means empowerment. Empowerment, not just for me, but empowerment for Jews in the diaspora, knowing that they have not only a home in the Jewish state, but a sense of pride in the Jewish state, a sense of knowing that we have our own army, our own voice, our own independence and sovereignty, but knowing that also our Jewish identity and our Zionist identity are so intertwined as it is between the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And so for me, a strong Jewish state is a prerequisite, I think, for a strong Jewish people, but it also works the other way around, vice versa. I think a strong Jewish people is a prerequisite for a strong Jewish state as well. So for me, that is where the sense of empowerment comes from.
And what's so interesting about your answers, Arsen, and they're so powerful, I know you, but you're a lawyer. You're an intellect. And yet you could give all the legal and the intellectual answer, but it comes down to two really touching, emotional, personal pieces to describe who you are as an individual and Zionism is to you. And I think that when we're having conversations about Zionism, it's important to remember that conversation that you just had with us, that Zionism is about a personal story. It's a personal belief of hope or strength. It's a dream. But you don't, to analyze it and make it a whole legal discussion and going to try to come up with the entire doctrine for the explanation of every word is not what Zionism is or should be a conversation about. Am I right?
You're 100% right. I could give you the theory of Zionism. I could go into textbooks and legal analysis and all these resolutions, but it won't sway one person, and it won't make one Jew a stronger Zionist or one anti-Semite see the light. Zionism is it's an inherently emotional concept. It is something uniquely personal, uniquely beautiful, uniquely uplifting and positive. For me, it defines my very values, the very principles upon which I live, upon which I think, upon which my morals are based, upon which I want to raise my family. But it's such an inherently, I think, powerful and uplifting concept, and it's a movement of, I think, ultimately liberation, to be free, but to be free in our ancestral homeland, here in the land of Israel.
There's no better gift to give or receive than one that can connect you with nature and your homeland. JNF has made it super easy for you to order your tree certificate online. Just go to jnf.org/trees, pick which special occasion it's for, whether a birth, bar mitzvah. Just order your tree online and let's get planting. Every tree counts. As a memorial to a loved one, as a tribute for a special occasion, as a link to your heritage, as a link to the land of Israel, to help the environment and reduce your carbon footprint. Every tree counts.
There is a battle, though, that's going to be fighting, and Arsen, you are one of the, for the Jewish community, the leaders of it. We have a Durban conference that is a 20-year anniversary from Durban 1. That is coming to the United Nations, a conference about human rights. Yet, what's our problem with the Durban conference?
Durban conference was held in 2001 in September. By the way, just mere days before September 11 terror attacks. And the concept behind it was a beautiful concept. It was a much needed concept. It was about the international community coming together to fight racism, to fight xenophobia, to fight discrimination. But instead of fighting racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, it promoted racism, discrimination, and xenophobia against the Jewish people. It descended into an unhinged display of utter Jew hatred. Not just anti-Semitism, but pure, unadulterated Jew hatred. Everything from, it had Hitler references. It had caricatures of Jews with hooked noses. It accused Israel of the worst crimes and crimes against the war, crimes against humanity, of apartheid. It gave birth to the modern BDS movement, the very movement that seeks the destruction of the Jewish state, the very essence of modern anti-Semitism. So instead of coming together to fight racism, it was this coming together of actors from the civil society, from the NGO community, and all under the umbrella of the United Nations, the very body that was created in the wake of the Holocaust, but has now become the ultimate platform and voice for anti-Semitism today. So those countries that do want to stand up and not just show that they're allies of Israel, but they're allies in the fight against racism, of promoting tolerance, cannot stand and participate at such a conference, at such an anti-Israel and anti-Jewish hate fest, and give credibility to this anti-Semitic attack, assault, not just on the Jewish people, but the Jewish state.
So really, the anti-Jewish movement is robbing legitimate conversations about human rights around the world.
Absolutely. I think what we're seeing in this case, it's this laundering of human rights, the language of human rights, the sanitizing of it into a discussion of vilification of Israel, of the Jewish state. Durban crystallized the entire campaign and movement to delegitimize and demonize and deny the Jewish state our rights. It was crystallized in 2001. The only country that was singled out was Israel. And now in September, by the way, this conference will be held during the General Assembly of the UN on the second day holiday of Sukkot, on a Hag, of course, no less, because the United Nations wouldn't have it any other way. So we need to stand up, we need to speak out, and all those that ultimately do stand, not just with Israel, but in the fight against racism, need to stand up, speak out, and not lend their name to this shameful conference.
But I think it's an important point that you said. We have to stand up against racism. We have to stand up for human rights. And that is what Zionism is about. And if we allow people, as what happened to you in Odessa, whether you wanted to or not, you were labeled. And so if we allow them to label, the anti-Jewish movement, to label us in any sort of a negative connotation, making a beautiful word like Zionism, we have to stand up and talk about human rights. We have to, as we always have. We have to stand up and talk about racism, but we have to talk it in a context that Zionism embraces all of this. Am I right?
You're 100% right. And, I think to my great regret, one of the great disappointments is that for a long time we didn't do that. We didn't talk about Zionism. We are struggling right now to reclaim the narrative. For too long, I think we had dropped the ball, and we allowed our detractors to define not just who we are, but what Zionism is. And by doing so, we allowed them to malign Zionism, to vilify Zionism, and to portray something that is so inherently universal and so inherently positive and liberating and powerful into something that is now portrayed and synonymous in so many circles as racist, as colonialist. It couldn't be further from the truth. Zionism is about human rights. Zionism is about free and equal opportunity. Zionism is about self-determination, as every people in the world is entitled to. So I think for too long, we did not make that case. And by not making that case, we allowed our detractors to define who we are and to vilify and besmudge what Zionism is. And so I think it is so important and so crucial that we do that today, that we reclaim what Zionism is, that we reclaim the narrative, that we go on the offensive, and that we portray Zionism for what it is, a beautiful, inherently universal, uplifting movement.
You are a social media rock star. And one of the things that, and I want you to talk to the audience here about what they could do, because I will tell you, the greatest pictures that I see on social media that talk about what is Zionism, who is Israel, I want to be fair to you, Arsen, it's not just the pictures of you, but it's the pictures of you at restaurants, the pictures of you holding up a glass of wine and having a glass of scotch, or with your children and eating breakfast. I've never seen anybody eat so many breakfasts. But those beautiful photos that are in social media are not attacking anybody, but they show the beauty of a family, a beauty of a country, a beauty of a movement. What is your recommendation for people to do?
For me, Zionism is literally every single day. I wake up in the state of Israel. I breathe Zionism through just by my sheer existence and living here, living in Tel Aviv, living in Israel. So when you talk about, for example, the online world, we are not just fighting the battle for Israel, fighting for Zionism on so many different battlefronts. And the one online is so crucial and so important, because especially that is where so many of the younger generation are today, from all the different platforms, from Twitter to Instagram to TikTok, you name it. And for me, you mentioned some of the things I post, and you'll find, by the way, also posts about Hamas and about Iran and the PA, but also about breakfast, and about my family and about beautiful sunsets here, because that is Israel for me. We are not defined by a conflict with the Palestinian people. That does not define who we are. That is one part of living here, one that we cannot escape, and one that we yearn, of course, for peace. But it doesn't define who we are. We are a people. We are a nation. We have the most incredible, breathtaking culture here, the most beautiful landscape. And you know very well, Russell, through amazing work that JNF USA does throughout the country, from the north to the Galilee to Beersheba, you've seen the land, you've planted on the land. So you know firsthand its breathtaking beauty. We have this dynamic sense of culture, innovation that is the envy of the world. So for everyone, again, it's something that is so inherently unique, and each takes out of that what they love. And yes, I love the food here.
So I will thank you, and I will tell people to follow your lead. Follow your lead, and we'll get your Instagram and your all your social media information out here. Especially when people are utilizing the United Nations as a way to be anti-Jewish. Let's follow Arsen. Take a picture of your family. Take your picture of family walking out in the open, because it is Sukkot. It's a celebration of what God gave us. And then write, this is Zionism, share it, because that is what Zionism is. Arsen, your last words to us. This is Zionism. What is it that we want to keep the message, keep something for everybody to do?
We need to look at Zionism really as a sense of empowerment, as a sense of pride, as a sense of something that is positive and beautiful and uplifting, and that connects the Jewish people and the Jewish state, irrespective of where we are, whether it is in North America, whether it is in Australia or Europe or anywhere else. We are united by our sense, I think, of Zionism and connection to the state of Israel, wherever we may be. And ultimately, the Jewish state and the Jewish people are inherently intertwined into this beautiful, I think, relationship and a sense of family, which is what connects me to you, and I think Jewish people all over the world.
Well, Arsen, you give me strength. You give us strength. Thank you for being part of our family.